So welcome back everybody, my name is Paul and a lot of people see my videos. I'm having a series on esoteric studies in the modern world, and there's a lot to cover, so I make a lot of short videos and try to cover those segments. It's not in any particular order so people can skip around and get in those segments. But today I'm going to talk a little bit about basically a really simple conceptual framework, because people who transmitted knowledge from ages past, they had to get the information. Imagine trying to convey a message of our culture today, important scientific facts, for example, to 10,000 years. Say, look, we want to have some kind of a mechanism that even in 10,000 years, or even 100,000 years, people will still be able to get this. Now that requires a really broad type of thinking, because, well, how are you going to do that? One is that, the ancients used a lot of stone, they used geometry, they used numbers, they used the basics, they used basically very, very simple principles which they put into art, into music, into design of buildings, and in stories, even just humorous stories. A lot of interesting information is embedded in ancient stories just because there's numbers and certain kinds of things like that, and animals and so on. They're trying to tell a story, but these stories get passed down and they become part of the human psyche. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about, I mentioned in one segment, if you try to conceive of infinity or just something empty, anything complete, we think about a sphere as a really good example, because a sphere has an infinite number of points around it, and it's a three-dimensional thing. Has a particular ratios that are incredible and so on. So the ancients latched on to the sphere and the circle as a symbol. And if you look back at the ancient times, the way they made symbols, they're not just like arbitrary, right? We have symbols today that they just arbitrary. Someone made a certain kind of a letter and emoji or something, and it's supposed to imply something, but on a real basic level. The ancient symbols that we've had today, many of them are still being used in math today, thousands and thousands of years later, because they work. But a lot of people even today, they study things and they don't realize that these symbols in and of themselves are trying to convey some really, really basic stuff. And I'm going to go over some of that today. I started here with the sphere, and I made a number of different ones, and you can see very clearly there's a lot going on here. For one thing, if you take the sphere and you say, let's say, for example, you have a circle, a pan, a perfectly circular pan, and it has water, it's completely still, and then you drop a drop right exactly in the center of that pan. It'll send out vibrations toward the edge of the pan, and they'll come back right back to the center if it's a perfect circle. So if you conceive of something that's absolutely still, motionless, and then somehow it starts to percolate or some vibration gets stimulated, you have what's almost like the opposite, which is one of really, really powerful symbols that the ancient Hindus still honor today. It's called the Linga. And I've drawn it here. Let's say you have the flat plane here, and then you have that very, very first cause, that very first vibration, in the middle of that, right in the center of that, you have a spike that goes up like that. It's like the first cause. And that symbol has a very, very powerful physical demonstration of a scientific principle, of an observation in a nutshell. So then you can expand. I'm going to go over briefly here, because this is all embedded in our own geometry of our own body, and it's amazing stuff. That's how powerful it is, and the ancients figured this out a long, long time ago. And even now, if you get into advanced physics, there are a lot of I'm not one, but there are people who are professors in that area, and they still are marveled by the ancient symbols and what they came up with. So I'm going to go over this quickly here. So you look at the top view here, and you have the circle. You have a very, very ancient symbol. As we all know, we have the circle with the point in the middle to represent the sun, to represent the atom, to represent the solar system, to represent a principle in nature. Then you have the divisions, okay? Now we start to get into some really, really interesting stuff. Now, if you notice the ancient system of 360 degrees for determining within a sphere or circle, it's a really old system and it's come down to us. We still use it today. It's the basis of all the ancient astronomy. The people watch the stars for thousands of years. You wonder, well, what were they watching for thousands of years? 360 has a lot of factors. I mean, I just did some of them here. These are all even factors. And you go, wow, you can do a lot of real simple math just by doing integers here. Then there's a few that I won't bother to go into it. I'm not a mathematician, but then you have like 7 and 11 and some of the other ones that are odd. You won't come up with an even segment and a circle. But anyway, that's another story. Now, again, here's again the symbol. This is like infinity. You look at the symbol and you think, what are they talking about here? They're talking about infinity. We talked about a sphere has an infinite number of points and it can be expanded. It can be any size. So a sphere represents infinity, and this is like an infinite, you might say. It's just basically a one full sine wave, a standing sine wave. It can represent just basically flat out whatever infinite, you know. So as you can see in cell division and so on, you get a lot of things like this. You get circles and you get flowers divide up into all kinds of interesting ways. And here's again the old yin-yang symbol. And the yin-yang symbol is very, very ancient. But again, you look at the symbol and it reeks with meaning. You have to let your mind, on some elemental level, psychologists know, our brain chemistry and the body that we have and water and all that stuff, it adds up to a certain kind of innate geometry and physics of our own body. So naturally it comes out when we, in the rest of nature, we're just a part of it. And all these things, again, we can have like the eye, the vesica piscis, you have the womb. Again, self-replication, multiplication is indicated by these symbols. Cell division here, cell multiplication here. There's so many examples in nature of how this is working. So people could just observe it. You can observe it in nature, and you don't have to have a PhD to get this stuff. It's just so basic, but you start to look at, if you study this stuff and you're a physicist or some kind, in any kind of science, engineer, I've read a lot of books from people who are architects and so on. They're totally marvel at the way nature has designed everything, or whatever the reason is, however it happened here randomly. Maybe it was random, but we're all part of it. Anyway, I want to talk more about multiplication, because here you have the symbol of the egg. Again, shape. This is a movement of an energy within the sphere. Now it's starting to multiply and start to expand, all because of vibration. Now, some basic concepts here, I just go skim over them a little bit. There's a torus field. Again, we try to visualize everything in 3 dimensions, because symbols can be 2-dimensional, but much more effective as 3-dimensional. Just like what was built into the pyramids and other ancient structures, they built in all this math and symbolism so that it wouldn't be destroyed. It's very, very intelligent of what they did. Now I'm going to go through a little bit how these symbols get into some of the other esoteric teachings. For example, let's start with the tarot. You have the infinite symbol, and then the angles, and then you have the vortex here, and the double vortex, and you have the elements, and there's a lot of symbolism in these tarot cards. Again, here, that infinite symbol also is the cycles and the rotation and the planetary orbits. Here you have almost like the vesica piscis, out of the center, out of the womb of the cosmos, out comes more creation, the egg. These concepts that we see in nature, the egg and reproduction and cell reproduction, all those kind of things can be observed on a macro level, and it's just tremendous what these ancient people have done. They've left us a legacy. Now here's again, this is the wand and the tarot. This is like the first cause, the power, the energy of fire, the heat that makes it expand. It's just, there's tremendous number. There's the colors involved. I'll go through quickly here some of the other tarot cards. People who are really into this, they can study it in more depth. Now, one of the things that this leads to ultimately, I'll just go over it again here. First of all, we start with some givens. If any scientist, any humble person trying to learn something, and you look at the cosmos, we can start. The ancient people left us a legacy of looking within and starting that question is, who are we? First of all, before we start looking out into the infinite universe and trying to figure out what it's all about, let us decide, let's try to figure out and understand what we are. Because let's say, for example, you're out in the forest someday and you find a really fantastic, complicated machine. And you have no way to, you don't know how to use it. You just say, well, I can do this and that with it or whatever, but you may be not even using it for the right even purpose. The same way this human body, we're not taught, look, this human body is an amazing vehicle. If you understand what you can do with your perception by going within and by resting and by being open, you can understand all this really basic stuff, because you relate in your daily life. The creation is like an open book. We look at it, we can see, if we see and observe and are humble and reflect on the nature of consciousness, and we go within with that information and understanding, we come up with a lot of this really, really basic stuff. For example, if you see water vibrating, like cymatics is a very sophisticated subject these days. Cymatics. You can observe the tendency of vibration in water, and the water vibration brings out the eggs of the various kinds of creatures that live there. You can observe a lot of this stuff and intuit some of the wisdom from it. That's why it keeps being taught for thousands of years, because it works. We're talking about the core, again, the conceptual framework. Now, when it comes down to more details, people try to get into relationship and proportion. There are students, we know them, they figured out the relationship, the phi, and all the different sacred relationships they call them. So there's a lot more people out there who can describe all that better than I can, but I'm talking basically in the conceptual way. The humble aspect of human beings is just to realize that we understand, we do not perceive everything. That's just, again, who are we? We can see that animals see different things and hear different things than we do, so in one level we should just say, well, what is it? How come I'm blind to most of the universe? How can I expand my understanding if I only see a tiny amount of what exists, you see? So, again, part of the important part of learning about esoteric studies is to pause and reflect and have some humility, because we're trying to understand something incredibly vast. The fact that we even have consciousness and walk around and just our bodies heal themselves, it's just a miracle. I mean, you have to admit, like, hey, do we have any machines that can do that? So nature's incredible. That's one reason I got into this, studying all this about ancient cosmology and so on. And I want to recommend a few books here. Again, most people know about Leonardo da Vinci. That guy knew some stuff. Well, there's a lot of people like him, and over the thousands and thousands of years, the human being is just totally amazing. They were ancient geniuses, just like long, long ago, they figured out stuff. How the world was made, sacred geometry. This book is fantastic. The author's name is John Michell. I mean, a lot of artists discover this stuff. Biologists discover this stuff. You study anything in nature, you're going to discover this stuff. But it's nothing new. It's been known for a long, long time. And that makes us pause, say, well, if they knew all this very sophisticated stuff very long time ago, what are we doing here? we're still learning stuff. Now this guy here, this was really, really good. A guy named Frank Chester. He came up with a brand new form that fits inside a sphere. It's in a regular form that has 7 sides, 3 of one and 4 of another, all equal. It took him years and years and years of experimenting to get to that point where he actually came up with another very, very unique shape, which he calls the Franktedron or something. I can't remember the name right now, sorry. But the applications is that it fits, for example, inside a sphere of the Earth. And it actually, when it spins, it makes a shape very much like a human heart. That's a New Sacred Geometry, the Art and Science of Frank Chester. Really recommend this book. And he's fairly recent. It took him 20 years to figure this out. So, again, I'm going to talk a lot more about esoteric psychology, esoteric philosophy. A lot of people out there talking and learning about geometry. I'm not an expert. I just try to recommend places that people can look in certain directions. And what it has to do with the inner experience, well, if we look at ourselves, the whole point of studying anything is to understand who are we, because what can we become conscious of? And there's some old statements called as above, so below, or as outside, within. We're a fraction of an infinite awareness, basically. We have a thread of our own being goes into the infiniteness, okay? And we can follow that thread. That's what the ancients taught. Follow that thread within to the subtler and the subtler and the subtler, and you realize, hey, my awareness, you might call that awareness that very first pulse, like somehow at some point in our human life we get to a point where we go, okay, I start to take the step of growth, the step of soul division, the step of expansion. And it's an eternal process, because we can get to a level of understanding where we kind of like, okay, things are stable, I perceive a certain way, and then maybe we're ready for another dimension, another expansion and understanding. So that's the point of esoteric philosophy and esoteric teachings, and basically self-knowledge. And you know, there's so many different ways to do it. I mean, if you study music, I like to play around with music. I'm not a musician, but I know some about music, and I've studied a lot about sound. There are musicians who do amazing stuff with sound, and I just try to tell people, look, everything that I'm trying to convey are things that I've learned over my studies over many years, and through meditation and so on. But I can't prove anything. I can say, look, let these concepts work on your own understanding, and take them in and try to get a sense of who you are in a broader sense. Because, like I said, we have an attachment to our personality and what we think about what we're doing and everything, our plans and everything. But on one level, there's a part of our being that doesn't have any goals. It doesn't have any. It just exists, and it's that subplane. It's that baseline. It's that essence of life. And I encourage people to find an instructor or a meditation teacher. There's many of them out there. I particularly don't teach. I'd rather be a student, frankly, but it takes a tremendous amount of power, faith and power and one's own understanding to go around the world like some people do and teach. I happen to be a student of one. His name is Prem Rawat. I mentioned in some of the other videos. But I'm going to go into more and more. I'll take a picture of this, and I've gotten a lot of really good feedback from everybody. I really appreciate it. So if you like any of this, please share it. And I love to hear other people's work. I watch other videos all the time, and I'm constantly learning. So thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you in another video.